This is Channel 253.
In this episode of Nerd Farmer.
That's how Russia looks at things. It says that I am in the region, United States is far away. President Trump is interested in that. He wants Nobel Peace Prize. Is he going to be interested tomorrow? How is this Zangezur project going to work? Who's going to protect it? So on and so forth. There are a lot of questions that are out there. And Russia thinks that, you know what, I can gain them all back. So therefore, instrumental here is Russia, Ukraine. If Russia can be stopped in Ukraine, these countries that I mentioned do get a chance to be truly independent and decide what they want.
This is the Nerd Farmer Podcast, a national conversation through a local lens. Welcome to the Nerd Farmer Podcast, brought to you by the members of Channel 253. My name is Nate, and I'm your host, a Tacoman abroad. In this show, we'd like to touch on local topics and sometimes global topics. And this is part 3 in an ongoing conversation we've had over the last couple of years about the situation in the Southern Caucasus. My guest today is, you know what, I'm going to call you my Caucasus correspondent.
Why not?
So, Sevinj Osmanqizi, you are a very renowned journalists covering events in Azerbaijan. I noticed you're now up to like 600,000 followers on YouTube. And so congrats to you for building that following. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me back in the show.
I'm always excited to learn from you. It's funny because we've been doing this show since 2017, and there's folks who've been down from day one and folks that joined the show like last week. This is your third time coming on the show and our third conversation about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And what I want to do is I want to bring folks who are newer to the show into the conversation. So I'm going to ask you to distill as best as possible the very complex history of the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh, which is the disputed zone between Armenia and Azerbaijan for listeners, and kind of talk about how we got to where we are today.
If you look at the map of the Soviet Union, you would wonder how come that there's so many enclaves in Soviet countries, whether it's Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, etc., so Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So that was the way I believe Soviets like to divide and rule. And Karabakh conflict, I believe, is one of those. And I believe we have never been this close to the peace. As you know, on August 8, Azerbaijan and Armenian leaders sat down together under the leadership of President Trump and signed a peace deal, what they call the peace memorandum between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Now we have Armenian Prime Minister flying over Azerbaijan. He did it already several times. We have Azerbaijani plane flying over Armenia. Only recently, we had an Armenian delegation coming to Baku, taking part and going back home. So this level of contacts is the first time happening now in the history of this 30-year conflict.
And this is a big deal. The first time I had you on in 2022 was when there was a hot kind of conflict that popped off, yes. And there was weapon fires being exchanged. And then the second time that you came on, it was the period in which essentially the Azerbaijan army had gone on an offensive and basically pushed the Armenian civilians who remained in Karabakh out of Karabakh and back into Armenia proper. I'm genuinely curious how we got here, because essentially there's like two different versions of President Trump that people are seeing happen. We're seeing a domestic policy that is very authoritarian and very unpopular. And then we're also seeing him go out and do these kind of foreign policy discussions and pushing negotiations in places where I don't think that progress was expected. And so he's told a version of the story that basically he brought the leader of Armenia and Azerbaijan into the Oval Office, and he's like, gentlemen, we're going to work out a deal, and they worked out a deal. And is that truly how the situation has gone down?
I believe that it would have happened one way or the other. It didn't happen over the night. It's more complicated. And I believe that the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict was there for somebody to take leadership over. Well, the thing is that for over 30 years, it was Russia who thought that both Azerbaijan and Armenia are its backyard, that it's the only party that has the key to Karabakh conflict. It could flare up whenever it wanted. It could stop it whenever it wanted. And both Azerbaijan and Armenia have finally come to a conclusion that a lot about this conflict has to do with Russia. So I think that was the turning point when you understand that, wait a minute, Russia arms Armenia, Russia arms Azerbaijan. Russia is interested for us to continuously buy these weapons to fight each other, use them. So I think once that happened, the Karabakh conflict was sort of there in the market. It was just looking for a buyer, for a customer who would say that, oh, I want this, I can solve it. So when President Trump, and I give him credit for that he actually took the leadership responsibility. He said that, okay, I can deal it. Why not? And if you look at those 7 wars, he says that he settled, Azerbaijan and Armenia is the only one that both leadership actually acknowledge that, yes, indeed, U.S. broker media peace worked. Of course, it's still not peace. I'm still not completely convinced that we're there, but we're moving in that direction. When I tell my listeners, my viewers, is that I wish when the opportunity presented itself and President Trump indeed took the leadership, I wish Azerbaijan and Armenia signed the actual peace. That would have been a big deal. This is not a peace agreement. This is a memorandum, and there have been 4 more memorandums before. But they also publicized, made public the text of the actual peace agreement that can be signed. So this is a big deal in itself, because now we know what is there, what's been agreed. There are 17 articles. Both sides have something that they're not happy because they did not see them there. But, you know, this is compromise. Peace is always compromise. You cannot get 100% whatever you want. So if things continue the way they are right now, for instance, if President Trump does not lose his interest to solving this issue, if Armenia is still led by someone like Pashinyan, who really understands that it's time to close this bloody chapter and start a new one and sign a peace, if Azerbaijani leadership is pressured that it is the right thing to do, that we finally have to close it and look for the future, not to the past, I believe that this can happen. It is very much possible that, let's say, in 2 years, we'll be talking about the genuine peace.
What are the either internal political pressures in Armenia or political pressures in Azerbaijan that have brought us to this point? So you mentioned like the Russian, that both countries have realized the role of Russia. But like beyond that, what are some of the internal happenings that are bringing us here? Because I'll be honest, I've had my eye on the conflict since we first spoke in 2022. And when I heard a deal was finally at hand, I was quite surprised. So besides Russia and besides President Trump being the person there in the right moment, what internally in either countries has brought us to the peace table?
Well, if we start with Armenia, and I'm not Armenia expert, I've never been to Armenia, so just seen what's happening. I believe that particularly after the defeat in Karabakh in 2023, when they realized that, wait a minute, Russia is not supporting them in Karabakh. Well, actually, if I go a little bit further, if I go to 2020, when with the second Karabakh war, when Azerbaijan war and Armenia lost, it was a miracle when, despite this defeat, Pashinyan actually won in the elections. This is historical, I believe, because he lost, and yet people voted for him. And I think when they voted for Pashinyan, they voted exactly because they voted for peace. They said, you know what, whatever, you are taking us in the right direction. This is my interpretation. They believe for decades that Russia wants their interests, is defending its interests, but they actually saw the real face of Russia, that when it wants, it's not there. When it wants, it turns blind eye. So I think that was an eye-opener for Armenian population, and they started looking for peace mediator elsewhere, which is West, France, United States, so on and so forth. In Azerbaijan, Armenia occupied not just Karabakh, it's been keeping under occupation the 7 adjoining rayons of Azerbaijan. So in 2020, Azerbaijan was able to return those 7 rayons, and Armenians left the Karabakh. So basically, Azerbaijan had sort of less interest in continuing this conflict, because the conflict as it is was over. So we were seeing people more and more talking about this is the time to actually look forward, that we don't want anything in Armenia. And, you know, Russia was pushing for more war. Russia wanted third war. Putin wanted a third war, and that war would have been in Armenian land, called Zangezur or Sunik in Armenia. So Azerbaijani population realized that, and they said that we don't want to go for Putin's war. If Putin wants Zangezur, because Russia's interpretation was that FSB, the Russian soldiers, should be stationed in Zangezur, and Russia should take over the Zangezur transit corridor. So Azerbaijani said, if this is what Russia wants, why wouldn't Russia fight on its own? Russia has army, Russia has its soldiers. Why should we die so that the Russian FSB comes to Zangezur? So what is important, what Trump did, is that Trump said, we're going to name this corridor Trump corridor. America is coming, not Russia, not Russian soldiers. This time it's going to be American entity that will be supervising over Zangezur.
So it's interesting because the last time I was in Yerevan, which is the capital of Armenia for listeners, it was right after what you mentioned had happened in 2023, where the Azerbaijan military basically had pushed the separatist, or whatever term you want to use to describe the Armenian fighters who were in Nagorno-Karabakh, out. And there was definitely a sense of resignation about things, that like they had fought for this territory and that it was lost. But I did not get the sense that that was like the end of the fight. It just felt like it was a point of national, shame is not the right word, but a moment of kind of national resignation. Mm. But it sounds like now what is happening is that we're basically codifying the situation on the ground as is. And so you mentioned that there's like 17 points to the agreement. I don't think it's a good use of your brain space to talk through all 17. But what are kind of the broad strokes of the agreement that both sides have now negotiated?
I think the important part is that we recognize each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. That's fundamental, which means Azerbaijan as it is recognized by Armenia, Armenia as it is recognized by Azerbaijan. That means that we will not be having territorial claims against each other. Well, nothing is mentioned about Zangezur, nothing is mentioned about the return of Azerbaijanis to Armenia or Armenians to Azerbaijan. And I think this is sort of, I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing that's what happened at the talks. Because Azerbaijani side were saying that we want the Azeris to return to Armenia because some 300,000 Azerbaijanis were forced to leave Armenia back in the 90s. Armenian side was saying that we want a return of our Armenians, some 100,000 Armenians, to Karabakh because they left Karabakh in 2023. So they came to sort of agreement that we both are going to be dropping that. So you're going to drop Armenians' return to Karabakh. We're going to drop Azerbaijan's return to Armenia. So your population stay in your country, our population stay in our country. You take care of your refugees, we take care of our refugees. So I am guessing that is because none of those are in the agreement. So that makes the process much smoother, much easier.
I want to get to a break, but I'm curious. What is the impact of this peace deal on domestic politics within Azerbaijan? The Azeri government is a very long-serving regime where power's been handed from the father to the son, and there's been my outside perception has been there's some unhappiness with the regime. Is this boosting their legitimacy? Like, how is this changing the perception of the government in Baku?
Obviously, it makes a lot of people happier about the regime in Azerbaijan now that the Karabakh issue is resolved. That goes without saying. But, you never mix apples with oranges. Apples are apples, oranges are oranges. As for me, I think that nevertheless, the government should be democratic. There should be human rights. So on. So I believe that actually to talk about peace, there should be human rights, because I regret that this peace has been signed without precondition that, you're going to be democratic, you're going to be having elections, you're going to be releasing all political prisoners. I regret that this is not taking part. I still think that it's not too late. I still hope that whenever the next stage is, when the sides actually sit down to sign the peace deal, that's still going to be on the table. It's unbelievable that there are almost 400 political prisoners. Those who actually wanted peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia are in prison, and we're going to peace with Armenia. So this is nonsense. But generally speaking, I think the population give credit to Aliyev for sort of resolving somehow this issue, and that goes without saying.
That's helpful. That's helpful. All right, I want to take a break here, and when I come back, I want to get my head more around the geopolitical landscape that kind of sits right now in the South Caucasus. And in particular, we've been talking about Armenia and Azerbaijan a lot, which means we aren't talking about Georgia. And I'm very curious about kind of their role as a broker in this as well. So we'll be back. Before we went to break, you were talking about how you wish there was preconditions around democratization tied to the negotiation. Something that I am curious about is the role of Georgia in this, because essentially Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia are all similarly situated, where they're former Soviet states with the Russians basically poking at them. Am I correct that during the conflict that Georgia basically took a position of neutrality while Armenia and Azerbaijan had their conflict?
That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to stay neutral because they have relationship with Georgia, they have with Armenia, they have relationship with Azerbaijan. Yes.
And then what role have they played in the negotiations? Because I remember reading a report that like some of the negotiations were happening in Tbilisi.
The United States at some point was promoting the idea, because this was somehow like contrary to Russia-led, because it was back then when Russia still was sort of more powerful. Russia never liked the idea of Azerbaijan and Armenia talking to each other, either directly or via some third party. And there was certain jealousy in the Kremlin whenever Azerbaijani and Armenian leaders were traveling to, whether it's Brussels or some other European capital. So therefore, I believe the common idea was that why not to have it in Tbilisi? Tbilisi is regional country, you can sit down and talk, but nobody really took those talks very serious, because Georgia is not in a position to put pressure on Azerbaijan or on Armenia. So it was sort of one of many talks.
I'm struck by, you mentioned when Russia was stronger. I think that many Americans experienced the war in Ukraine through the filter of American elite media and the point of view on the conflict that elite media wants us to have. How would you describe the changes in Russia's geopolitical situation? How has the war in Ukraine weakened their ability to impose their will on the Caucasus, if at all, in your opinion?
Big time, because, Russia is now focused on what's going on in Ukraine. And it's been 3.5 years. That wasn't the plan, I believe. The longer it gets dragged on, the less attention you can pay to other issues. if not war, things would have been completely different. So this is in a way thanks to Ukraine that and Ukrainian people courageous fight against aggressor is that Azerbaijan and Armenia have come to direct talks, are less worried about Russia's role. So absolutely, like look what happened with Russian forces in Azerbaijan and Armenia. They left. Nobody could believe that. I myself became a target by some smear campaigns saying that, oh, she was saying that the Russian soldiers never gonna leave Azerbaijan. They're gonna live everywhere but not Azerbaijan. But that actually happened. Of course, I want to hope that this issue is solved, but that's not how Russia looks at this. Even today, even while this war in Ukraine continues, they're still claiming that, neither Azerbaijan nor Armenia left the 2020 treaty or the memorandum on ceasefire. So they did not pull back from that memorandum. That means that it's still in effect. This is such nonsense, Imagine it's like Azerbaijan and Armenia are already signing peace between themselves elsewhere in Washington, in the United States. They both say that we want peace. We want to forget what happened in the past. But Russia says that, wait a minute, you have to consult your neighbors. You never left this treaty. And that treaty is so expired, so outdated. The only part that is not out, because that memorandum actually said that Russian troops are gonna be stationed in Karabakh. So there are no Armenians to protect in Karabakh. They all left. But Russia says that, oh, wait a minute, it's not outdated. So you never know. Russia is never gonna change the way it looks at things. And that's the dangerous part. That's why I'm saying that I wish on August 8th, they actually signed the peace treaty rather than a declaration, because every day that peace treaty is not signed, believe me, Russia is gaining momentum. Russia is thinking, how can I fight back? And they're not hiding this. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova came out and said that, well, you know what, it's still in effect. Azerbaijan and Armenia never left this memorandum, so it's still in effect, which means that now we have two opposite agreements, one signed in Washington under with President Trump, and this is the recent one, but Russia does not recognize it because it's not part of it. So this is the situation. And when it comes to, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm fascinated by so much of this because part of it is that there's a set of blinders that you get because you consume American media, right? And so like the American media narrative goes that like, well, President Trump is gone and he's negotiated this agreement, and in doing so, he's gonna, bring the Caucasus into the American orbit and against Russia. And like that doesn't quite pass a smell test to me. Like if anything, after being part of the Russian Empire, part of the Soviet Union, and having Russian peacekeepers, air quotes, in each of the countries, the one thing that these countries deserve is to be able to have self-determination. And speaking of, I mentioned Russian peacekeepers and I air quoted. For listeners who haven't heard our prior conversations, can you talk about why peacekeeper is such a misnomer if they hear that Russian peacekeepers are going to a place? Why is that a misnomer? Why is that not what it sounds like at all?
Well, we say it's not peacekeepers, they are peacekeepers. So they want to keep the peace of the land wherever they put the food on. Yeah, the very fact that they are no longer in Azerbaijan, in Armenia right now. Actually, there is a base in Armenia, it's called Gyumri base. Apart from that, certain Russian troops actually left some parts of Armenia, especially when it comes to the border with Iran and Turkey, but some are still there. But they did leave the Azerbaijan, which is a good thing. Earlier, we were talking about the Russia-Ukraine war. A lot depends on that because depending how that war goes on, if Russia wins in Ukraine, it's not going to be just Ukraine. It's going to be other post-Soviet countries, even NATO countries. Look what is happening in Romania, what is happening in Poland, what is happening in Estonia, what is happening in Moldova, in Georgia. Russia got back Georgia. Georgia was on its path to West, to Europe. They had even included in their constitution that they're going to integrate into European Union. Look what is happening. So that's how Russia looks at things. It says that I am in the region, United States is far away. President Trump is interested in that. He wants Nobel Peace Prize. Is he going to be interested tomorrow? How is this Zangezur project going to work? Who's going to protect it? So on and so forth. There are a lot of questions that are out there. And Russia thinks that, you know what, I can gain them all back. So therefore, instrumental here is Russia, Ukraine. If Russia can be stopped in Ukraine, these countries that I mentioned do get a chance to be truly independent and decide what they want. If Russia wins in Ukraine, so we're looking at a completely different situation. As Maria Zakharova said, they will be returning their so-called peacekeepers to Azerbaijan and Armenia. There will be new Karabakh war. They will be bringing their person to Armenia. By the way, there are elections in Armenia on June 7th. A lot depends on that as well. Russia wants to be, Russia is not going anywhere. Russia is going to be there. Russia looks at it and says that I want it back. I want former USSR. Do you remember what Lavrov sweatshirt he was wearing at a recent summit in China? No. It said USSR. It actually said USSR. I mean, it's not a coincidence. This is what they're dreaming about. And this is how they're looking at it. They're like, okay, you want to go sign some paper in Washington? Go ahead, nothing's going to change. That's not how Russians' mind works. So that's why it's important that we support Ukraine. It's not just about for the sake of Ukraine. It's for the sake of the whole region. It's for the sake of Europe. It's for the sake of the United States. Because Russia has to be stopped. Because otherwise, it does not recognize any other way, any other language.
One other regional power who I'm curious about is Turkey. And I'll be honest, I did not have my head around the solidarity that Turkey and Azerbaijan share and have until I visited. And the amount of Turkish flags that I saw, and then understanding like the historical links between those two countries, that was illuminating and educative for me. What role, if any, has Turkey been taking either in brokering this agreement or anything, or is Turkey a non-starter in negotiations because the Armenians won't sit down with them?
Well, I think things are changing. We do have some good vibes coming from Turkey-Armenia front as well. As a matter of fact, I think Armenia also have come to realization that its path to EU is going to be through Turkey, because in the end of the day, Turkey can block any candidacy in NATO or can create problems for EU, although Turkey is not a EU member. If you look at the policy of Pashinyan, of General Yerevan, is that they are for reconciliation. And Turkey-Armenian reconciliation talks have been going on for a long time. The only major problem there was that Azerbaijani territories were occupied, and that was a precondition for Turkey. And Turkey said that unless you leave those territories, I'm not going to open my borders. So the desire to open borders, to start, trade and all those communications, it has always been there. And I think with the signing of peace memorandum, things are looking better. And in fact, if we are lucky and we do get to see the signing of actual peace, let's say after 2016, because I don't see this happening before June 7 elections next year. And then that's what Yerevan said, that, we're not looking to change our constitution. And this is basically the remaining condition by Baku. So probably after June next year, maybe 2017, that's my calculation, is if we get to see that, I believe that Turkey is going to be playing a major role in the region. Look how Turkey actually played this role in Syria, for instance. It is recognized by all parties. It's recognized by Yerevan and Baku and its region. This is, I would say, the major force that would stop Russia bullying the smaller countries. And Russia is
really helpful for me. This is really helpful for me. I actually want to list my takeaways from this. So number one, Russia's failures to win the war in Ukraine have weakened their hand in the region, which have allowed the U.S. to move in as an actor and help bring a peace deal that was ready to be made.
Right.
Regionally, it seems that the time is right for an enduring peace, and the conditions are on the ground where the government in Yerevan is willing to negotiate peace both with you and potentially with Turkey. And in doing so, that would end a 30-year conflict and like a 100-year conflict going back to the Armenian genocide. Both of those are fascinating. In addition, you and people who share your worldview about the future of Azerbaijan and independence and democratization in Azerbaijan are very invested in the war in Ukraine and making sure that Ukraine remains free, because a free Ukraine means a free Azerbaijan, a free Poland, a free Moldova, free set of Baltic states.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So Ukraine is fighting for all of us.
That's not the story about Ukraine that we hear in American media, and I wish that it was, because if it was, I think so many Americans wouldn't be so complacent about the fight that's happening in Ukraine that really matters. So I have to say, I'm just so thankful for having you on. You've made time now 3 times to come on the show, and you've given us a university level course in your region every time. Again, thank you so much for making time for this. I truly learned a lot tonight, and thank you.
Thank you for having me.